Things never happen the same way twice, dear one.
So, whether it's Charlie XCX playing the White Witch or Saoirse Ronan playing the Wardrobe,
I will be in Narnia. I'll be Mr. Tumnus if I have to be. I'll be whatever she wants. I'll be the snow, I don't care. I'll be the wardrobe.
Rumours and speculation over Greta Gerwig's Chronicles of Narnia adaptation are rampant, the most recent one being Meryl Streep playing Aslan. Now, let me just preface this entire video essay by saying that this is not yet official, so I'm not going to waste my breath ranting or raving about a casting that might not even happen. However, with that being said, the second these articles dropped, people obviously had strong opinions on it, mostly negative. And while I take the position that I'd much rather an Idris Elba, Sean Bean type be the voice of Aslan, or better yet bring back Liam Neeson, I do believe that people are being a little dense and unimaginative by simply slapping the woke label on this potential casting choice without actually, even if it's for a second, asking themselves what Greta Gerwig's vision is. Because while many recent Hollywood films do partake in gender and race swapping for shallow reasons, without any further analysis on the effect that could have on the storytelling, like Snape, I just don't buy that Greta Gerwig falls into that category.
I would say the two big books of my childhood were Little Women and the Narnia books.
I really do have such reverence for Narnia. I loved Narnia so much as a child. As an adult, C.S. Lewis is a thinker and a writer.
If she were to go through with this, she would 1, of course have thought about the effect it would have on the story, and 2, she would of course have reasons justifying this change that has less to do with making Narnia modern or whatever. In fact, it could be the opposite, with her drawing inspiration from historic tradition, with the historical Christ as mother trope. So again, even though this would definitely not be my first pick for Aslan, let's do what many aren't doing and discuss whether this could maybe, just maybe, actually work for the betterment of the story, because the Christ as mother topic is fascinating. Before we start talking about Christ as mother, let me cover the basics of why people are upset. We already know by now that gender and race changes to iconic characters gets the internet fuming, so this would be controversial regardless. But with Aslan, people are particularly sensitive not just because he's an iconic character, but because for millions, he's a theological symbol. I will get into his physical features like mane that make his replacement with the lioness have ripple effects beyond a simple gender swap. But for now, it's important to cover the fact that C.S. Lewis did not create a simple children's fantasy hero. He crafted a deliberate, unambiguous Christ-like figure. From his first mention in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, Aslan is more than a majestic talking beast. He is the divine ruler of Narnia. He's its creator, all-knowing and all-powerful, yet gets brutally executed on the stone table as a sacrifice for Edmund's sins. He then returns in glorious resurrection as a redeemer, a clear, blatantly obvious parallel to Christ's crucifixion. C.S. Lewis, a devout Christian and a scholar of medieval literature, designed Aslan as a direct allegory for Jesus Christ. And before people object in the comments saying that Lewis hated allegory, like they did on my other Narnia video, you should probably know that the reason he doesn't consider this clear Christian allegory to be allegory is because he literally views Aslan as Christ himself, with no hidden meaning, no metaphor, no symbolism. Christ, just taking place in another world. It is not subtext, it is the foundation of the entire series. So by suddenly shifting this imagery to a female voice, and perhaps female-looking lion, it risks, in the eyes of many, destabilizing the theological coherence of the story. Because just in case it needs to be stated, Jesus was a guy. Whether religious or secular, we should all be in agreement that historical Jesus was male. In Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis wrote, "The Son of God became a man to enable men to become sons of God." Whether it's Son of God, the Bridegroom of the Church, or the Lion of Judah, these titles carry gendered implications. They reinforce a masculine archetype of kingship, sacrifice, and divine authority. Lewis was an Anglican deeply rooted in this tradition, so he intentionally mirrored these qualities in Aslan. If Aslan was a leopard, panther, cheetah, or tiger, we might be having a different discussion, because tiger to tigress does not seem like that big a deal in terms of what they represent in culture. But a male lion? This is a classic symbol of masculine strength and regality. It was not a random selection. He wanted a figure whose authority was absolute, whose presence was awe-inspiring, and whose voice was deep, commanding, and paternal. In The Four Loves, C.S. Lewis distinguishes between paternal and maternal love, associating the former with authority and the latter with nurturing. And he does acknowledge that both are aspects of God's nature. But does this mean he would approve of a female Aslan? The answer is almost certainly no. While Lewis was not a rigid traditionalist on all fronts, his theological writings unsurprisingly stick to the masculine depiction of Christ, and he never blurred the lines in his depiction of Aslan. The lion is consistently a fatherly, kingly, and warrior-like figure, with no clear intention of being read as maternal. Even in moments of tenderness, such as comforting Lucy or forgiving Edmund, his power is supposed to come across as distinctly patriarchal in tone.
Lucy! Lucy.
Aslan?
So while, of course, some of the outrage is knee-jerk resistance to modern reinterpretations of classic characters, I am not going to dismiss all criticism as mere anti-wokeness, because that misses the deeper discomfort many fans feel. Not just a character change, but a theological deviation. All adaptations should aim to both respect and enrich the source material if possible. The fear here is that rather than enriching Lewis's vision, it will completely dilute it, because the allegory is the foundation of the story. So at its core, the controversy that would erupt over this casting goes beyond the standard anti-wokeness discourse. It's about the integrity of Lewis's Christian metaphor. It's not just an unexpected change, it's seemingly incompatible with the theological framework that defines Narnia. However, with that being said, and this is where things get interesting for me, what if this potentially new interpretation isn't as radical as it seems? What if the idea of a feminine divine, even in Christ, has roots far older than Lewis? Here is something that I find pretty funny when I see people balk at the idea of a female Aslan. C.S. Lewis depicting Christ as a lion has about as much backing, probably even less, than any writer or artist would for depicting him as a maternal figure. Yes, the Lion of Judah is a real term representing Jesus from the book of Revelation, but aside from this one appearance, depicting him as this animal is nowhere near as widespread as maternal imagery. In Matthew 23:37, Jesus longs to gather Jerusalem's children under his wings just as a hen gathers her chicks. Then Peter the Apostle replaces the mother-hen metaphor with that of a human mother, saying that, like newborn babies, crave the spiritual milk of the word, so that by it you may grow up with the result being salvation. This talk of Christ nursing or giving birth is pretty prevalent. There's the fact that in the early church, Christ's pierced side on the cross is often seen as a womb birthing the church. In Deuteronomy 32:18, God gives birth to Israel. In the year 180, Irenaeus wrote that Christ was offered to us infants as milk, so we could be nourished from the breast of his flesh. Clement of Alexandria pretty much says the same, and countless other examples. Yes, of course, none of these people are using she, her in reference to Jesus. They know he's a man. My point is simply that immediately connecting with the lion metaphor and being open to that depiction in fantasy, but then thinking a feminine metaphor just wouldn't work, is ridiculous. It has worked since the beginning. But I want to flash forward to medieval times, long past early Christianity, to show how this not only stuck around, but developed further. Long before modern debates about gender and divinity, medieval Christian mystics were more directly exploring the exact same thing that casting Meryl Streep as Aslan would do: Christ as mother. As truly as God is our father, so truly is God our mother. Julian of Norwich was a 14th century anchoress. This isn't a random quote from an insignificant book that I dug up to prove a point. This is from Revelations of Divine Love, the earliest surviving example of a book in the English language known to have been written by a woman. Julian did not see this as a contradiction, but instead as an expansion of Christ's divine nature. She described Christ's suffering on the cross as akin to labor pains, his nurturing love like a mother breastfeeding her child. A significant strength of Christianity is its capacity for cross-cultural representation. Diverse communities from completely different sides of the planet can project themselves onto Christ, picturing him in terms that resonate with their own identities. This phenomenon is well documented in Christian art history. European Renaissance paintings, for example, depict Christ with Caucasian features, despite his historical Middle Eastern origin, while Ethiopian Orthodox iconography from as early as the 12th century portrays him with dark skin and an afro. Japanese Christian traditions have historically depicted Christ with Japanese features and cultural attributes, from almond-shaped eyes, pale skin, and subtle rosy cheeks, to wearing a kimono. All of these communities know where the real Christ was from, telling them, well, actually, the historical Jesus was neither Italian or Ethiopian or Japanese, completely misses the point. But why then can this understanding not be applied for gender as well? It follows logically that the same tradition of projecting yourself onto Christ can apply to women too, interpreting him through a maternal lens without negating the fact that he is obviously historically a man. And on top of this, Greta Gerwig's case is not just propped up by the fact that she's a woman taking on this story. This medieval tradition of Christ's maternal love is not limited to women, not by a long shot. Saint Anselm was a Christian philosopher and theologian from the 11th century who served as the Archbishop of Canterbury from 1093 to 1109. This man, born nearly 1,000 years ago, wrote prayers addressing Christ as a mother, emphasizing tenderness and sacrificial care. But you, Jesus, good Lord, are you not also a mother? Are you not that mother who, like a hen, collects her chicks under her wings? Truly, Master, you are a mother. For what others have conceived and given birth to, they have received from you. It is then you, above all, Lord God, who are mother. And, Jesus, like a mother, you gather your people to you. You were gentle with us as a mother with her children. Here's a list of other men that wrote about Christ as mother. And it's not just writing and prayers, it's in medieval art as well. Look at this illustration created somewhere between 1324 and 1328, showing the betrayal of Christ. Does he not look kinda pregnant? During the fall semester of 2022, student researcher Cheney Ray thought the same thing, saying, I couldn't ignore the fact that Christ looked pregnant. It was so obvious to me, and yet no one seemed to be talking about it. She continued to find artwork that related to Christ as mother. One of them shows two women at the cross catching the blood pouring from Christ's side wound, which she related to midwives who catch the baby in delivery or who clean up the blood that resides after childbirth. And this tracks with the early belief that his pierced side represents a womb birthing the church. So basically, what I'm trying to say is these Christians, the writers, priests, and artists, they were not fringe radicals. They were not advocating for what critics would call a woke agenda. They were devout Christians working within Orthodox theology, and their vision of Christ transcended his role as a man, revealing a God whose love could both be fatherly and motherly. So, moving on to Aslan, if maternal qualities can be seen in Christ, they can also be seen in him. Here's why. Lewis himself was a medieval scholar deeply familiar with these traditions. While he chose to emphasize Aslan's masculine qualities, the Narnia books still contain moments where Aslan's love feels maternal. When Edmund is rescued by Aslan from the White Witch, he receives a talk that happens off the page. All we know is that the talk was one that no one ever heard, and Edmund would never forget. I love this, because for all the talk of people's knees trembling in the presence of Aslan, this parenting of Edmund does come across as gentle and motherly. Sure, maybe Aslan was reprimanding him behind the scenes, we don't know, but I think most people imagine it correctly in that Edmund witnessed compassion, forgiveness, and unconditional love in a way he hadn't before, and it changed him. Ray puts it perfectly, saying, mothers too bear the weight of their children, are heavy laden and travail in pain, laboring to deliver them. But instead of delivering a child, Christ delivers the children of God from sin. That's what I get from Edmund's whole relationship with Aslan. And that's what I think Greta Gerwig would be seeing with a female Aslan. The same again applies with his sacrifice and resurrection. Yes, it can be seen as a male warrior's triumph, but the strength of the scene is actually played out in this poignant and beautiful act of enduring pain in order to give life, akin to childbirth. A female-voiced Aslan could heighten these nuances, offering a fresh take on divine love, one that balances power with nurturing compassion, Yes, Aslan is powerful, but he's also comforting. His voice is strong, but also soothing. There's no doubt in my mind that Meryl Streep could project both sides as well. And if the comforting, soothing, nurturing aspect of Aslan is further developed in this adaptation, that could certainly enrich the story. Of course, the execution matters. A feminine Aslan shouldn't feel like a gimmick, but a deliberate theological statement. The risk that audiences might view it as hollow gender swapping rather than a return to Christian mysticism is still a problem. But that's what makes this casting speculation so interesting, because it isn't hollow, it is backed up by all of this. So if you're going to do it, you have to lean into the mysticism. Make it clear that this choice is grounded in medieval theology, and that it's not a rebellion aiming to spit in the face of the original depiction. So while I made the case for a female Aslan undermining Lewis's allegory, you can also easily make the case for this expanding it, by tapping into the medieval tradition of Christ as mother. Greta Gerwig could honor Narnia's spiritual roots while offering a fresh vision of divine love, one that's ancient. Because Aslan embodies more than a warrior, he's a protector, a comforter, and a life giver. What's more maternal than that? But look, at the end of the day, it comes down to the audience. No matter how historically grounded or theologically nuanced the idea of a feminine Christ figure may be, none of this matters if the audience outright rejects it. So let's put aside the theological stuff and just talk about the basics, what a lion actually looks like. The image of Aslan with the golden mane, the thunderous roar, his overwhelming physical presence is burned into the minds of readers and watchers. So when I talk about the story's symbolic language and how casting Meryl Streep could fundamentally shift it, it's not just about voice, it's not just about Christ, it's about physically portraying authority in the strongest way possible. I'm not saying lionesses can't do that, I'd be terrified to be in the presence of one, but let's not pretend that one isn't way more terrifying than the other. And Aslan should be terrifying. When Lucy asks Mr. Beaver, is he safe? Mr. Beaver responds, safe? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe. And again in the same book, Mr. Tumnus tells the Pevensey children, he's wild, you know, not like a tame lion. This wildness and authority is visually embodied in his mane, a natural crown that radiates power. Later, when Aslan sacrifices himself on the stone table, his mane is shaven, a deliberate parallel to Christ's humiliation before the crucifixion. The moment is devastating because the loss of his mane strips him of his regal splendor, just as Christ was stripped of his garments. The 2005 film adaptation emphasizes this symbolism. Aslan's mane is a visual focal point, glowing in the sunlight as he leads his people, and bristling with energy when he roars to break the witch's spell. A lioness, no matter how majestic, lacks this physical marker of kingship. A mane is not just hair, but a symbol of dominance and divine right in the animal kingdom. Then there's his roar. A lion's roar is one of the most powerful sounds in nature, carrying for miles and serving as both a declaration of territory and to intimidate their rivals. Lewis weaponizes this trait in Aslan. In Prince Caspian, when the Telmarines have all but erased belief in Aslan from Narnia, his roar, deep, resonant, and unmistakably male, shatters the silence of the ages. It's not just a sound, but a summons, awakening the land and its people. This moment is pivotal in the 2008 film, where Aslan's roar literally shakes the earth, crumbling bridges and rallying the Narnians. Lionesses are not known for their roars. Their vocalizations, while formidable, lack the same cultural weight. The male roar is deeply embedded in human mythos as a sound of power. To replace it with a lioness's growl would dull the impact. It's no surprise that Lewis anchored Aslan's godlike power in male traits. So while theology may affirm God's gender transcendence, and as much as we can talk about Christ as mother, or the fact that God is neither a man or woman, storytelling demands concrete imagery. To audiences raised on millennia of Lioness King symbolism, a lioness Aslan wouldn't just challenge tradition, it would fight against the very archetypes that C.S. Lewis successfully used to make his audience feel Aslan's divinity. The question then isn't whether God can be represented as a female. The mystics already answered that, but whether Narnia can sustain the shift without unraveling it for the audience. So here's the thing, despite this casting rumor piquing my interest, I believe a female Aslan is a hill that this adaptation absolutely doesn't need to die on. While the theological arguments for Christ's maternal nature are intellectually compelling, Julian of Norwich's revelations, Anselm's prayers, the entire rich tradition of medieval mysticism, none of that will really make a dent in audience perception. I would love for this to be some bold, artistic reinvention, but in today's hyper-polarized climate, that just isn't happening. Christian audiences will reject it, the culture war audience will use it as fuel for months on end, the discourse will be unbearable, and even your normal, general audience will simply ask, why change it? And the disappointment behind that question will not be solved by talking about Christ as mother. It will not be solved by a masterful performance from Meryl Streep. It's really not worth it. Not when there are so many other ways to honor Narnia's spiritual depth without self-sabotaging the film's reception. Want to explore divine femininity? Do it with Susan. Please expand her arc and fix the problem of Susan. Or highlight the White Witch's twisted maternal symbolism. Create new roles for Narnia's untapped lore, but don't drastically change the franchise's central figure regardless of your reasoning. It's not worth it. At the end of the day, this isn't about what's theologically possible, what's backed up by historical precedent. It's about what's strategically wise. C.S. Lewis gave us a Christ-like lion, not a lioness, for reasons that made perfect sense in his theological framework, for reasons that impact even secular audiences. If Greta Gerwig does go ahead with this, then all the best to her. I'm sincerely rooting for this adaptation, but in my opinion, some battles aren't worth fighting, especially when the war was lost before the first shot was even fired.
What were you all doing in the wardrobe?
You wouldn't believe us if we told you so.